For most of the 20th century, we had two explanations for the pyramids. The first was slaves. Thousands of them, whipped and broken, dragging stones across the desert under the burning Egyptian sun until the thing was done or they weren't. Biblical, brutal. Hollywood loved it. The second was aliens. Laser-precise extraterrestrial engineering, because surely ancient humans couldn't have managed this on their own. The pyramids are too perfect, too big, too old. Therefore, spaceship. Both of these explanations share something interesting in common. They're both completely wrong.
And the actual answer, the one sitting in the archaeological record, confirmed by physical evidence, backed by workers' own handwriting scratched into stone, is so much more interesting than either of them that it's genuinely strange it took this long to become the version everyone knows. The people who built the pyramids were not slaves. They were not aliens. They were paid workers, organized by one of the most sophisticated state logistics operations the ancient world ever produced. They had bakeries, they had hospitals, they had titles and team names, and a quiet, persistent pride in what they were doing. And we know all of this because in 1990, an archaeologist's horse tripped on a hidden wall.
First, where did the slave story even come from? Because it didn't come from archaeology. It didn't come from Egyptian records. It came from the book of Exodus, which describes Hebrew slaves building great cities for the pharaoh. That image lodged itself into Western consciousness and never quite let go, even as evidence accumulated that it wasn't what happened at Giza. Egyptian records from the period of the Great Pyramid's construction, around 2560 BCE under Pharaoh Khufu, contain detailed administrative documents about workforce management, pay allocations, food distribution, labor rotations. These are not the records of a slave operation. These are the records of a highly organized state employment system.
The alien theory requires less unpacking. It is based on the assumption that ancient people were incapable of sophisticated engineering and organization, which is an assumption that collapses immediately the moment you actually look at what ancient people accomplished. The Romans built aqueducts that still function. The Greeks calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy. The Maya tracked astronomical cycles across centuries. Ancient humans were not less intelligent than modern ones. They were working with different tools and more time. The pyramids are extraordinary. They are not inexplicable. In 1990, a tourist was riding a horse near the Giza Plateau when the animal stumbled on something hidden beneath the sand. Archaeologists were called. They started digging. What they found was a cemetery. Not a royal cemetery, not a tomb for officials or priests, a cemetery for workers, people who had spent their lives building the pyramids and been buried respectfully near the monuments they built. The graves were modest, mud brick tombs, simple offerings, but they were graves, proper burials, people who mattered enough to be interred near the greatest construction project in the history of the ancient world. Slave burials don't look like this. Slaves don't get buried near the things they built with care and ceremony. They get buried where it's convenient, or not buried at all. This discovery cracked the question open, and what came out of the subsequent excavations over the following decades dismantled the slave narrative completely.
Egyptologist Mark Lehner and his team spent years excavating what they eventually identified as a workers' city, a purpose-built settlement south of the Sphinx, constructed specifically to house the people building the pyramids. What they found there was not a labor camp. It was a functioning community. Bakeries, large industrial-scale bakeries with bread molds stacked in the thousands, producing enough bread to feed an enormous workforce every single day. The scale of bread production at Giza is staggering. Estimates suggest the bakeries were feeding somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 workers at the site's peak. Breweries alongside the bakeries, because ancient Egypt ran partially on beer the way modern construction sites run on coffee. Beer was nutritious, relatively safe to drink compared to water that might be contaminated,
and it was issued as part of the daily ration. The workers at Giza were getting paid in food, and the food was substantial.
Fish and meat. Lots of it. Analysis of the animal bones found in the settlement shows a significant quantity of prime cattle cuts. The good parts, not the scraps. Whoever was organizing this operation was feeding the workforce well. Not grudgingly, but deliberately. Well-fed workers lift more stone more efficiently than starving ones. The Egyptians understood this. And then there were the medical records. Archaeologists found skeletal remains showing healed fractures. Bones that had broken and then knitted back together correctly, meaning someone had set them and cared for the person while they recovered. One skeleton showed evidence of a successful amputation and survival afterward. Ancient surgery performed on a construction worker who then lived. You do not provide medical care to slaves. You replace them.
The graffiti. This is the detail that gets me most. Among the physical evidence found at Giza, archaeologists discovered workers' graffiti. Names written by the crews themselves on stone blocks and in the passages of the pyramids. Team names. Crew identities that the workers had given themselves and scratched into the work they were doing. One crew called themselves Friends of Khufu. Another called themselves Drunkards of Menkaure, which is either a testament to ancient Egyptian humor or a very honest assessment of how they felt about the night shift. These are not the marks of people who had no choice but to be there. These are the marks of people who were proud enough of their work to put their names on it, who identified with their team, who had enough ownership over what they were doing to joke about it in writing. Slaves don't name their crews. Slaves don't leave jokes in the walls. These were workers who had enough of a sense of identity, enough of a sense of belonging to the project, to sign it.
How it actually worked. So if not slaves, how? How do you get 20,000 people to a desert and keep them there long enough to build something that has stood for 4,500 years? The answer is the Nile. Egypt's agricultural calendar was dictated by the Nile's annual flood. Every year for several months, the flood made farming impossible. The fields were underwater. Farmers had nothing to do, and the pharaoh had a workforce sitting idle. The state organized rotating crews from farming communities across Egypt. Farmers came to Giza during the flood season, worked on the pyramid, were fed and housed and paid by the state, and returned home when the flood receded and planting season began. They didn't need to be forced to come. For many of them, working on the pyramid was a better situation than a flooded farm. At least at Giza, there was food. But this seasonal workforce was supported by a core of permanent skilled workers, stonecutters, surveyors, engineers who understood how to align massive stones with extraordinary precision, craftsmen who had made this their life's work and passed the knowledge down. The logistics required to run this operation were staggering. Feeding tens of thousands of workers required supply chains stretching across Egypt. Papyri found in 2013 at a site called Wadi al-Jarf, the oldest papyri ever discovered, describe in precise detail a supply operation for Khufu's pyramid, written by a middle official named Marir, who spent his days organizing deliveries of limestone from quarries at Tura to the Giza site by boat. These are shipping logs, supply chain records, the bureaucratic backbone of one of history's greatest construction projects, written by an Egyptian official who was essentially running logistics for the most ambitious building project his civilization had ever attempted. Marir's diary is so specific, day by day, load by load, that it reads less like ancient history and more like a very old project management spreadsheet.